Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us on this webinar today. My name's Kirsty McIsaac and I'm a member of the Education Support Team here at ACCA. We are delighted that you're joining us for the first of our Destination ACCA webinars. This is a brand new webinar series where we're going to be looking at your pathway to becoming an ACCA member. Now, I'm joined today by my colleague Heather Murmu from our professional development team, and we've got a great agenda lined up for you. But before we get started with that, let's just go through some quick housekeeping points. So at the bottom of your screen, there are several icons that you can use throughout this webinar. There is a help icon, so this one looks like a set of gears. That provides the resources that you need to resolve any technical issues that you might experience during the webinar. There are also icons for the slides and the media player, and you'll need to have both of these open during the webinar, so make sure that you've got those selected. You can also rearrange your screen to suit your preference. Now, if at any point your sound isn't playing or the slides are not progressing, try refreshing your browser because that usually fixes the problem. There is a Q&A button that you can use to submit your questions. Now, we've got a dedicated team working behind the scenes with us today, and they're going to be trying to answer as many of your questions as possible throughout the session. So you don't need to hold back until the end of the session if you do have a question that you'd like to ask us about practical experience. Now, given the number of people who are joining us today and the volume of questions that we do receive in these live webinars, we can't guarantee responding to everybody directly. But we've left some time at the end of the session where we're going to try and answer some of your live questions and focus on the ones that we think will be the most helpful to everyone who's attending. We have also got an attendee chat icon, and that allows you to communicate with other attendees who are also listening into the webinar. Now, any responses that you add in the attendee chat are visible to everybody, but that's a chance for you to get involved and say hi to your fellow students. So you can use that just now just to say hi and let us know where you are in the world. There's also a resource list icon, which includes useful links to the resources that we will be mentioning throughout the session. And finally, registering for this webinar means that you will be sent an email tomorrow giving you access to a recorded version of this webinar. So don't worry if you miss something or if you have any technical issues, you will be able to access the recording and rewatch whatever it is that you might have missed. So to kick off our webinar today, let's find out a bit more about you with a poll. Tell us where you are on your ACCA journey. So maybe you're new to ACCA and you haven't started your exams or your PER. Maybe you have started your exams, but you've not started on your practical experience yet. You might have started both your exams and PER, or you might be somewhere else on your journey. And if that's the case for you, then do let us know in the chat where you are in that journey. Okay, I'm going to give it a couple of minutes just to see if we can get some more responses. We've got about a third of you have responded now, so let's see if we can get a few more. Excellent, answers coming in. I'll just give it a few more seconds. There we go, we are over 50% now, that's great. Okay, let's take a look and see where you all are. Okay, so new to ACCA, we've got under 10% of you who are brand new. For those of you who are new, it is absolutely great to see you here today. You are starting an incredible journey. Now, becoming an ACCA member is going to open doors to global opportunities and to a thriving professional network. And it really is the ultimate goal that is worth aiming for from your very first day with ACCA. Most of you, so about 70% of you have started your exams, but not your practical experience. So you're deep in that exam preparation phase, and that is really tough. But do remember that the exams are going to be your stepping stones to globally recognised ACCA membership. So keep pushing forward. Each pass brings you closer to your goal and the rewards that it brings. And then we've got 21% of you have started your exams and you're already working on your practical experience. So you're already building the skills that you need for a successful career. And completing the ACCA journey is going to validate all of that hard work and position you as a trusted professional in the industry. But no matter where you are on your journey, aiming for membership is a commitment to your future, and you're on a pathway to joining our growing community of 250,000 ACCA members. So you're not just earning a qualification, you're aiming to join a global network of professionals who are shaping the future of finance. Now, we know that for most of our ACCA students, progressing through the exams is at the top of your list, and that's great. But it's important to remember that to become an ACCA member, you need to complete 3 equally important elements. So those are the ACCA exams, an ethics and professional skills module, and the practical experience requirement. So in this Destination ACCA webinar series, we'll be putting exams to one side and taking a closer look at those other elements. So in future sessions, we'll cover the importance of ethics and professionalism for both exams and employability. And we'll also take a look at the skills and strategies you'll need to take your first steps in your accountancy career. But today we are here to talk about the practical experience requirement. And so with no further delay, I will hand you over to my colleague Heather, and we will get started.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. Hello, everybody. My name is Heather Murmu, as Kirsty has already introduced me, and I'm a Professional Development Coordinator at ACCA. And I'm also joined by my colleagues from Professional Development and the Member Support Team, who are on hand to answer your questions as you submit those through the Q&A. Today, I'm going to talk about the Practical Experience Requirement, or PER. Practical experience is a vital part of the ACCA qualification because it shows employers that you can apply the knowledge and techniques gained throughout your studies in the workplace. There are 2 key elements to the PER. You need to achieve 36 months supervised experience in a relevant accounting or finance role, and also demonstrate that you've achieved a set of performance objectives. And you must record your PER in the online recording tool, which you can access through your My ACCA account. You can use experience gained prior to registering with ACCA while you're a student, or after you've completed the exams, or any combination, so you don't have to wait to start recording your PER. So on the screen now, you can see a copy of the PER dashboard, and this can be accessed via the My Experience link within your My ACCA portal. This is the part of your My ACCA account where you'll record all of your practical experience. You'll be able to see an overview of your PER, including your employment information, the number of months that you've accrued in your relevant role or roles, and the performance objectives. So it's important to note that any information that you record within your recording tool must be a true reflection of your own personal experience. You'll be asked to declare this and your integrity by agreeing to a strict liability clause before you're able to start recording your PER. And you'll also reconfirm this at various points throughout your journey. So to begin, let's take a look at the time requirement of the PER. To complete your PER, you need to achieve 36 months of supervised experience in one or more relevant accounting or finance roles. So you might be wondering, what is a relevant role? It's a role where your time is spent on accounting, finance, or audit and assurance tasks, or in other technical specialisms such as taxation, insolvency, or management accounting. You don't need to gain your experience continuously or in just one single role. You can gain your experience at different times and in different roles. And you can use experience you gained in previous roles, even from before you became an ACCA student. You can also use experience you gained in part-time or voluntary work. It's important to remember that it doesn't matter what sector or organisation you work in to gain your PER. You can also gain experience in a partially relevant role. So for example, if you only spend 50% of your time on accounting and finance tasks, then you can still use this experience to count towards your PER. You would just accrue the time more slowly. So all of these different types of experience can count, provided that it was supervised by a qualified accountant. This is absolutely key. And we'll go on to talk more about supervisors later on. So to start recording your experience, you'll need to add details of your employer and then your role, and this is the screen where you'll add this information. In addition to your job title and start date, you're also asked to confirm the average hours you work per week and the percentage relevance of your role as highlighted on the screen. The help icons next to each field give you extra information to help you to record your details accurately. And the recording tool will take all of your role information and automatically calculate how much time you can gain, so you don't have to calculate it manually. If you're currently in a role, then you can leave the end date blank and your time will continue to accrue each month. So on this screen, this is where you would also highlight if your employer was an ACCA approved employer, if you're working in an audit role, or if your role includes lecturing. Once you've added your role details, you'll see your progress displayed in the pie chart. When you reach 36 months experience in your role, or when you add an end date to a role because you're moving job, you'll see a message reminding you to submit your time to your supervisor and to get it signed off. And remember, you can achieve your PER across multiple roles and multiple employers. So you should add details of all of the relevant roles you've had, which you're using towards your PER. This is the page where you can claim your time. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see information about your roles. And in this example, the message says that you have 17 months that you can claim now. So to do this, you would click the Claim This Time button as circled in red. And once you've clicked on the Claim This Time button, your time claim will appear on the right side of the screen. And you would then select the practical experience supervisor that you want to send your time claim to from the drop-down list. You might have more than one supervisor linked to this role, so you need to make sure that you select the correct supervisor. You can then add a comment if you want to, and then you'd click the Submit button at the bottom of the page, highlighted in red. You can't submit this until you've confirmed that you reconfirm your agreement to the strict liability clause. Your supervisor will then receive an email asking them to review your submission. I know this is a whistle-stop tour of the recording tool, but there is a lot of guidance available to help you to navigate this journey.
Thanks, Heather. That was really helpful. Now we're going to be stopping every now and then just to try and answer some of the questions that were submitted before the session. So first set of questions we've got are about time and relevant roles that Heather has just told us about. So Heather, at what point do our students need to start their practical experience requirements?
So students can start to record PER at any time. So you don't need to wait until you've finished your exams. And as soon as you start working, you should start recording your experience. You should bear in mind that it might be difficult to get your time and objectives signed off after you leave an employer. So recording your experience as you go along is preferable. If you haven't yet started work, we would still suggest that you log into the recording tool just to familiarise yourself and to get familiarised with the requirements as you are today by coming along to this webinar. And that will all help you for when you do start working.
Perfect, thank you. We've got a question from someone who is working at a US firm, so a firm in the United States. Is that experience still valid for PER?
Yeah, this is a great question because it will apply to other students who'll be working all around the world and might have this question. So you can work anywhere in the world for your PER as long as you're in a relevant role and you're able to get your experience signed off by a suitably qualified supervisor.
Perfect, thank you. And does an internship count towards PER?
Yeah, absolutely. So an internship would count, and it can be a great way to build experience towards your PER. So when you do your internship, you should claim the time and any objectives that you complete in the recording tool and get them signed off from a qualified supervisor at the place where you do the internship.
Perfect. Okay, we've got another question here. Does all of your practical experience have to be completed in a single workplace, so in one workplace, or can our students move roles while they're completing their PER?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think that's probably already been covered, but yeah, totally. You can definitely move roles. You might find that you're actually not gaining enough experience in your role and you don't have opportunities to gain the experience that you need to get all 9 objectives. So you might consider moving on to a different role in order to gain that experience. Of course, there might be a different reason why you decide to move employer, and that's absolutely fine. You can split the 36 months up between employers, and the 36 months doesn't need to be continuous either. So if you had a break between employments for any reason, you'd simply stop having time going towards your PER for that time, and you'd start again when you next start working. So it really is flexible, and you're not committed to 36 months with one employer once you start your PER. So I hope that answers the question.
No, I'm sure that does. That's really clear. Couple more questions before we move on. So can PER be based on objectives or tasks that were completed in a supervised role more than 3 years ago?
So it can. There might be other people on the call today who have experience from quite a few years ago, and we recommend not using experience from more than 5 years ago, so that the experience you're counting towards the PER is fairly current. But you can count previous experience. So again, it's as long as the person who supervised you was qualified and they're able to sign off your objectives. So any time that you complete can be signed off by someone from the HR department, and we'll talk about that more a little bit later. But ideally, you would get everything signed off by your line manager from your role.
Great. Can teaching be added to your practical experience requirement? We've got someone here who's been teaching for a few years. Okay,
yeah, so you can. So up to 12 months only though. So up to 12 months of lecturing experience can count towards meeting the PER. And this experience must be at a minimum level equivalent to the applied skills exams of the ACCA qualification. And it may well be that when you apply for membership, you might be asked to give confirmation or evidence of the lecturing experience that you've gained, just to show that it's at that level.
Great. And our last question for now, when do I have to send the request to sign off my time? So do I do that during my notice period, or do I do it after I have left my role?
Mm-hmm. So in this case, what we would suggest is that you do get your time signed off before you leave the employer. So it's likely you would be doing that during your notice period. We wouldn't recommend leaving it until after you've left, because your supervisor might move on, or they might not be able to be available to sign off your time after you've left.
Lovely. Thank you, Heather. Okay, shall we move on with our next section?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're now going to move on to take a look at the performance objectives. You need to achieve 9 performance objectives in total, and objectives are how you demonstrate your effective performance in the workplace. They set the minimum standard of work that you're expected to achieve and demonstrate, and they describe the kinds of work activities you may carry out. They also highlight the values and attitudes that you're expected to possess and demonstrate as a trainee accountant. If you've ever taken part in an appraisal process at work, you may find the objectives are similar to the objectives and expectations set by your manager. And objectives and the exams are closely linked, meaning that the knowledge and techniques you've developed through your studies is also relevant in the workplace. And the tasks and the activities you'll be asked to demonstrate are also closely related to the type of work you'll undertake on a regular basis in an accounting or finance role. You can and should start completing your performance objectives as soon as you can, because it will make it easier to write and sign off when the examples are more recent. By waiting until you're ready to apply for membership, you might have changed employer by then, or your supervisor might have moved on and it might be difficult to contact them. The objectives are grouped into 2 categories, essentials and technical, and these are the essentials. They place emphasis on ethics and professionalism, stakeholder relationship management, strategy, innovation and sustainability, and governance and leadership. These are essential, fundamental business skills that all accountants require. So every ACCA trainee needs to achieve all 5 of these objectives. There are 17 technical performance objectives to choose from, and they fall into 6 different technical areas. Trainees need to complete any 4 from these 17 objectives, and you can complete the objectives in any order. We always recommend that you choose the technical objectives that best align to your role, because you should find it much easier to achieve the performance objectives that link most closely to your everyday work. So if you choose an objective from one area, you don't have to complete all of the others related to that subject. We also find that trainees are sometimes drawn towards the tax or the audit objectives. So please only choose these objectives if you are working in a specific audit or tax role. And this is because the level of experience you need to achieve these objectives means you'll need to have worked on audits or in a tax environment on a regular basis. So if performing audits or undertaking tax work isn't a regular part of your role, it would be better to choose other technical objectives which better match the work you do on a regular basis. There are 3 parts to each performance objective. So you'll have a description, which is, of course, a summary of the performance objective. There are 5 elements for each, and these outline the tasks and the behaviours that you must demonstrate to achieve the performance objectives. And there's also a 200 to 500 word statement where you have to summarise how you achieved the objective's description. It's important to be aware that you don't need to write about all 5 of the elements in your statement. You only need to write about how you've met the overall description of the objective. And please also note that you only need to write 1 statement per performance objective. So that's 9 statements in total. So what should you write in your statement? Firstly, as we've just mentioned, remember you don't need to write about every element in your statement. You just need to summarise your experience of how you've met the description of the objective. So to do this, you should follow these 3 useful steps. Firstly, explain what you did. So give an example of a task that you've worked on. Secondly, describe the skills that you've gained which helped you to achieve the objective. And lastly, reflect on what you learned, what went well, or what would you do differently. And our top tips are to use at least one example for each objective and avoid repeating information that you've used for a previous performance objective. Try to give your supervisor a different example, because the most common reason that supervisors need to reject an objective or for applications to fail a PER audit is because there aren't enough examples to demonstrate your experience. Make sure that you say what you did. These are personal statements to you, so use the word I as much as you can. Sometimes we find that trainees write sentences like, in my organisation, we do this, or we do that, or this happens, or that happens, when what you actually should be writing is, in my organisation, I do this, or I did that. Even if it was as part of a team, you need to highlight the work that you have done. So make sure that you're clear in your statement that it was you who carried out a task or an activity and what you learned from it. Remember that it's your experience and your statements will be unique to you. So what do the performance objectives look like in the recording tool? We previously saw on the dashboard that you can see some of the performance objectives and their status. This dashboard will give you an overview of what objectives you're currently working on, as well as which ones you've completed. So in this example, you can see that objectives 6, 9 and 13 have been started, and so they're in progress, and 1, 3 and 11 have been completed. You can access the performance objective page by clicking on the View Objective button, or by simply clicking on one of the objectives that you've already started working on. You can then select the objective you want to start working on from the list on the left. The performance objective details will appear on the right-hand side of the screen, and the status will change to In Progress. You can see the performance objective description at the top, that's in the bold text, and then below that the elements for this objective, and then underneath that you'll have the box where you'll write your statement. So to complete this objective, you would of course demonstrate that you've met the elements and the description within the workplace, and then you would write your 200 to 500 word statement in the box and then click the Save Statement button. You can then claim the objective and send it to your supervisor for sign-off, and the status will again change to be under review. You don't need to write your full statement all in one go, so you can keep a draft here or keep some notes and return to it at a later date. There are detailed step-by-step guides available in the help section of the recording tool to show you how to complete a performance objective and send it to your supervisor, and you'll also find quick help when you click on the red question mark. To send an objective to your supervisor, you'd again select their name from the drop-down list. You'd select the employer and the role where you completed the objective. You'd add a comment for your supervisor if you want to, and then submit it to them by clicking the Submit button highlighted in red. Again, you may have multiple supervisors and multiple roles, so it's important to choose the correct supervisor and role where you gained the experience. As with your time claim, the performance objective can only be submitted once you've reconfirmed your agreement to the strict liability clause. And your supervisor will then receive an email, and it will ask them to review what you've submitted. As mentioned earlier, we offer lots of guidance and fact sheets on how to complete your PER, and this Achieve booklet is just one of them. This particular booklet shows the full description of the performance objective, which you should refer to when writing your statement, and you'll also be able to find example activities for guidance. We also have a webinar dedicated to PER that you can listen to on demand and goes into more detail about the PER recording tool itself and navigating through this. And of course, you will have a copy of this webinar, which is in fact very similar. We also have a helpful fact sheet called How to Write Performance Objective Statements, which gives detailed guidance on what you're expected to write, what your supervisor is looking to see, and what ACCA are reviewing when your PER is submitted. And these documents are all in the resources section of this webinar today, so please feel free to download those. But you'll also be able to find them on the ACCA global website.
Thanks, Heather. So we're going to come back to some more of your questions. So first question, and it's a really relevant one, how do you choose your objectives or your tasks?
This is a great question. So the first thing would be to get a hold of the Achieve Performance Objective booklet and consider which objectives relate to the work you're doing and the exams that you're currently studying for, if you are still studying for your exams, and choose those which are most relevant to you. However, you shouldn't be on your own in this, so your supervisor should also help you to choose your objectives, and they should also help you to find opportunities to gain experience to meet all of the elements, and we'll talk about that more later on as well.
Fantastic. Should your practical experience only come from actual work experience, or can we include competences that we've achieved as we complete the applied skills modules based on our study material?
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'll widen this question out to any work experience that isn't real world work experience. So the answer to this really is that any PER you claim has to be based on real work experience, rather than things such as skills modules or any simulated work. So even in theory, if you would know how to do a task, or you've done it in a simulated or say a role play type setting, if you haven't completed the task in the workplace, then you wouldn't be able to use that towards your PER.
Thank you, that really clears that up. So we've got a question here. If you haven't done all of the elements of an objective in one task example, can you put more than one down?
Yep, absolutely. So as we mentioned earlier, you should aim to give a mix of examples within your statements anyway. And if in one example you didn't meet all of the elements, then you can give a different example. It doesn't have to be one task for all 5 elements, for example. And as we've mentioned now a couple of times, you don't need to write about all of those elements in your statement, but you have to be able to provide examples showing how you've met the overall description. And when your supervisor signs off your objectives, they're reviewing your statement and they're also looking at the list of elements to confirm that they're happy that you've met all of those for the objective.
Thank you. Okay, here's an interesting one. So do we need to write any theory in our practical, in our objective statement? So for example, our understanding of ethics, or do we just write our experience and give examples?
So this is a great question, and we do see this a lot in statements where quite a lot of the word count is used up by giving theory. But the short answer really is that you shouldn't give theory in your statements. You need to remember that PER is about applying the theory in the workplace. So your statement should be giving you real work examples, that should be giving us real world examples of how you've met the objective. So we don't need you to demonstrate the theory around a different element or an objective. So I hope that's clearing that question up.
Yeah, that's great. So keep theory for your exams, but in your practical experience, we want to hear the experience itself. Cool.
Yeah, that's a great way to
last question just for this. Yeah, last question just for this section. Where can we find samples to have a better understanding of what to write in the statements?
Again, another great question, and one we get asked a lot. And we understand that people feel like they need to have templates or examples. However, we don't provide these. And this is because each person's experience is different, and your statements will be unique to you. We do understand that it's difficult to write statements without guidance. So as we've mentioned earlier, we've got the fact sheet called How to Write Your Performance Objective Statements, which you can download today. And also on YouTube, we'll talk about these resources more later, but we have a performance objective masterclass video, and that goes into more detail about what's expected in your statements. So we'd recommend having a look at those to get a good idea. Thanks, Kirsty.
Lovely. Okay, we'll move on with the next section.
Okay. So now we're going to take a look at practical experience supervisors. And this is an area that we usually get a lot of questions about, which we can understand. So as you know, you'll need to have both your performance objectives and your time in a relevant role signed off by a practical experience supervisor. You can't start submitting time claims or performance objectives until you have a supervisor or supervisors linked to your PER record. Your supervisor will sign a strict liability clause to declare their integrity and to confirm that the information they approve is a true reflection of your work. What does your practical experience supervisor do? Well, your supervisor should support you by helping you to identify which performance objectives you should target and maybe setting a target date by which you should achieve them. They'll help you to plan out the experience that you need to achieve the objectives that you're targeting. And this might mean helping you to arrange job rotations, project work, or maybe a secondment so that you can get a range of experience. And your supervisor should work with you to see if you need any personal development to help you to achieve the necessary level of workplace performance required to achieve the objectives. So they might suggest training, research, or additional coaching to help you to do this. And they should also regularly evaluate your progress towards your PER. And your practical experience supervisor is the person who will sign off on all of your experience once they believe that you've met the required standard. In order to be able to sign off your performance objectives, a supervisor must be a qualified accountant or auditor who's a member of an IFAC member body and or is recognised by law in the country that their trainee is located. So it's important to remember that a supervisor doesn't need to be an ACCA member. They can be a member of any IFAC body. A supervisor doesn't need to be qualified in order to sign off the time completed or the time completed in a role. So if your direct line manager isn't qualified, then they can still sign off your time. Time can also be approved by the HR department. So as long as they work in the same organisation, they can approve the time that you've spent there. So what if your line manager isn't qualified? In this case, you must find a second qualified supervisor to work with your line manager to sign off the performance objectives. This second qualified supervisor might be an accountant working at the same company in a different department, or they might be an external auditor or consultant. It's important to stress that any supervisor must have a working relationship with your employer and yourself in order to be able to supervise you to some capacity and be able to verify your experience. They should meet regularly with you and your line manager to discuss your progress. Sorry, bear with me for one moment. So as we mentioned earlier, before you can send your supervisor any time claims or performance objectives for sign-off, you'll need to send them an invite and you'll need to get them to register in My Experience. To register your supervisor, you add them to your role details and provide some basic information. This will then automatically send them an email invitation. So you'll be asked to select your relationship to your supervisor, and you can see the various options circled in red on the drop-down menu on screen. The relationship you choose here will determine what your supervisor can sign off. Remember that qualified accountants can approve performance objectives, and only supervisors from within your organisation can verify your time. And if your supervisor is to approve your objectives, they'll need to provide evidence of their IFAC membership by uploading this into the PER tool. And don't worry, this is all explained in their invite about how they need to do this. And again, we've produced guidance and a webinar aimed at supervisors themselves. Therefore, if you found your perfect supervisor, feel free to send them the documents or the links or even the webinar itself, and it will explain their role and how this benefits both you and them. Now on to approved employers. The Approved Employer Programme is an accreditation of an employer's learning and development policies and systems, and it's the trainee development stream that relates specifically to PER. If an organisation has been awarded approved status for trainee development, this means that ACCA has assessed that the level of training and support they provide to their trainees is sufficient to meet the PER, and they have suitable learning and development processes in place. Working for an approved employer holding trainee development approval at either gold or platinum level allows you to claim the performance objectives in a simplified way, but this will always be at the employer's discretion. You would still be achieving the same level of experience to meet the objectives, but how you record your experience would be slightly different. Not all roles at an approved employer will be relevant, so it's important to check if your employer is an approved employer and they hold the approval for your role and your location. So you can do this by contacting your HR department or finance manager, as they'll usually be the people responsible for the accreditation. If they can't provide you with this information, then you can check the Approved Employer database, which is available on the ACCA website. If you're working with an approved employer for trainee development, you're still required to achieve the minimum of 36 months supervised experience. This will still need to be recorded within your PER recording tool, and you'll add this information when recording your employment details, as we saw earlier, to indicate that your role is with an approved employer. Remember, this simplified route is just in relation to how you record the performance objectives, not actually achieving the experience. When you leave the employer or when you're applying for membership, you'll submit a PER confirmation form, and this is unique to the Approved Employer Programme. So you'll submit the PER confirmation form, which will verify your time with the employer and the performance objectives that you've completed. So you can complete all of your experience with an approved employer, or you might leave before you complete everything. So if that's the case, we can update your experience to date based on what you submit on the confirmation form, and you can complete whatever's remaining with your new employer. And this way your progress is accurately reflected on all of ACCA systems. So I think it's back over to Kirsty now for more of your pre-submitted questions.
Yes, thank you, Heather. Okay, so let's get started. So first question we've got here, my manager's not sure how to enrol to complete the sign-off. How can I help him?
Okay, so you will basically be the person initiating this process. So as we just saw, you will register your supervisor within the PER recording tool, and they'll receive an email inviting them to register. And the email will give them step-by-step instructions. Remember, we also have the Become a a Practical Experience Supervisor Guide that you can give out to your trainees and you can download from today's session or the website. If you're working for an approved employer, as we've mentioned, it is different. You don't need to register your supervisor in the tool, as they'll complete the PER confirmation form with you instead.
Lovely. Okay, how can we sign off PER when your previous line manager from your previous role has left the organisation?
Yeah, so as we mentioned earlier, it is always, as far as possible, best to try and avoid this situation, but we know that sometimes these things do happen. Basically, your PER has to be signed off by a qualified person who supervised your work. So if they've left and no one else supervised your work, you would need to reach out to them and see if they're prepared to sign off the objectives you completed while they worked in your organisation. Or you would need to demonstrate to a new supervisor meeting those objectives. And remember for the time that any internal supervisor, including somebody from your HR department, can sign that off. So I hope that's clearing up the question.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Maybe a slightly similar one. How can I approve my work experience if I've already left the organisation?
Yeah, absolutely. A similar situation, but the other way around. So if you've already left, you would need to see if you can reach out to the person who supervised you for your objectives. And again, your time can be signed off by any internal supervisor. They don't need to have been a qualified supervisor. So it could, again, be somebody from the HR department.
Brilliant. Okay, we've got a question here. So if I have met some of the PER objectives working for my current employer, and I want to change to a new job in a new company, can the outstanding objectives be met during my working time with the new employer and signed off by that new employer?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the policy is flexible, so you don't have to complete all of your objectives with just one employer. You might have multiple employers, you might have more than two, and that's absolutely fine. As long as your supervisor is satisfied that you've met the elements and sign off those objectives, it's fine if it's within different employments.
Cool. Question here, is it okay to record the experience after some time has passed, or does it have to be done while you're working?
Okay, absolutely. So obviously these were pre-submitted questions, but I hope we've made it really clear today that we would recommend recording your experience within the recording tool and getting it signed off before you leave any employer. We appreciate that if you're studying, you'll really be focused on passing your exams. But we do recommend spending some time familiarising yourself with the PER, as you're already doing today by joining this webinar, which is fantastic. But also, please log into the recording tool, have a look around, and download the documents, just so that you're ready to go once you're ready to start. So as we mentioned earlier, you access your PER recording tool through your My ACCA account. So yeah, if you're able to, get started recording your experience, because it's a common issue. It can be really difficult or even impossible to get your PER signed off after you leave an employer, or if your supervisor moves on. So best to get started as soon as you can.
Yep, that's some really good advice there. Final question for this section, are there different sign-off forms if you're getting signed off by an approved employer compared to if you're not? So what if you've got a mix of both employers for your PER?
Okay, so for the first question, it's simple. The form is the same, whether it's a gold or a platinum approved employer. And I'm not sure if this question was specifically asking about this, but I'd like to mention that you can have a mix of approved employers and non-approved employers for your PER. So if you've worked for an approved employer for 1 year and you've achieved some of the objectives, you would send in your PER confirmation form to claim those objectives, and then you'd complete the rest of your PER following the standard route, where you'd write statements in the recording tool and have them signed off by a supervisor in the tool. So you can have a mix. You could have more than one approved employer, or you can have an approved employer and non-approved employers. So I hope that's helpful.
Yep, that's really great. Okay, hand back to you just for our last section.
Thank you. So, when you've passed your exams and you've completed your PER, you'll be invited to apply for membership. So you can also do this proactively via your MyACCA account. Sorry, bear with me. I just want to check that I have the right slide here. Yes, I do. Sorry about that. When ACCA receives your application for membership, your PER is then assessed to confirm that you've met all of the requirements. At this stage, some applications are then selected for an enhanced check of their practical experience, and this is known as a PER audit. We can also select trainees for a PER audit while they're still working towards PER. So this enables us to check that you're on the right track and provide you with tailored support if required. So don't worry if we reach out to you prior to your membership application. If you are selected for a PER audit, then your application would be referred to the Professional Development PER Audit Team and you would be notified. The audit team will review your full PER record. They'll review your employment history and verify your employment information. They might request additional supporting information from you, for example, your employment documentation, such as contracts and job descriptions, or a list of your activities and responsibilities from your line manager. The audit team will check your supervisor's information to confirm that they're a suitably qualified supervisor, and they'll also review your relationship with them. They'll review your performance objective statements to verify that sufficient detail has been provided and cross-reference this to the information in your job description or provided by your employer. The audit team would contact you if they have any questions about the PER information you've provided. And if there are any issues, you might be asked to redo some or all of your PER. In the unlikely event that the team find any irregularities with your PER information, such as false employment information, plagiarized performance objective statements, or false supervisor relationships, then there would be a further investigation and you might be subject to disciplinary action and your ACCA registration could be at risk. And this is why it's very important that all of the information you record within your PER recording tool and throughout your ACCA journey is a true and accurate reflection of your own personal work. So after today's session, what are your next steps? So your first step, if you haven't done so already, should be to log into the PER recording tool and have a look around. Even if you're not currently working, it's good to become familiar with the recording tool, and then you could take a look at ACCA careers available on the website to help you find a relevant role. If you're in a relevant role, then you should get recording. So your next step should be to find and register a practical experience supervisor, because as we mentioned earlier, they can't sign off any of your experience until they're registered. Remember to record your progress online and get your objectives reviewed and signed off when you gain that experience. Don't leave it all until the end. It's much easier if you record as you go along. We know that this has been a lot of information today. However, as we've mentioned, there are a number of fact sheets and guidance documents within this webinar, as well as on our website and within the PER recording tool itself. So please don't worry, we're here to help you every step of the way. So I think we do have some time to have a look at some of your questions that you've sent in live. So I'm going to hand back over to Kirsty.
We do. We have had so many questions today, so thank you very much for everyone who has been submitting your questions. I mean, I hope we've managed to answer quite a few of them in the background. The team has been very, very busy answering your questions. We won't obviously be able to get an answer to everybody, but I think we'll try and cover some questions just now before we wrap up that maybe will apply to quite a few people. So here's a question. Can I complete all of my objectives before I finish all of my exams?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can do. And that would be fantastic. It would put you in a great position to apply for membership. move on to the next stage of your journey.
Okay, in my current job, we don't have an ACCA qualified accountant to sign off supervised PER, and the accountants are CIMA qualified. Can they sign off my PER?
Yeah, absolutely. As long as your supervisor is a member of an IFAC member body, then they'll be able to sign off your PER for you. So do have a check. What you can do is go onto the IFAC website. So you would be able to Google IFAC, IFAC, and you'll be able to find a list of member bodies and check if your supervisor's qualification is covered by IFAC. If you're not sure if your supervisor is otherwise qualified by law, then please reach out to us. Either contact students@acccaglobal.com or use the contact us form online. Contact us to double check, because what you don't want to do is submit your PER records and find at the last minute that your supervisor wasn't qualified. We see it quite often that the assumption is made that their qualification is related to accounting or finance, but it might not actually be broad enough. So please do double check before you go ahead and submit all of your PER. We don't want you to be disappointed when you get to the end or be held up in any way applying for membership.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, if I use experience from a previous role to complete my PER, can my current manager sign it off, or do I have to reach out to my previous employer?
Okay, this is a really important question. So the person who signs off the experience that you write about in your statement and the elements that you've gained has to be the person who supervised you do it. So you cannot get your current manager to sign off work that you've completed elsewhere. Even if they've seen you do it, but in a different context in your new employment, they cannot sign that off. So quite often we do see in statements where a trainee has written their statements with a previous employer, maybe a mix of a few employers, and the supervisor has understandably gone, oh, well, I know they can do all of these things. I'm quite happy to say that they've done it. But you'll find that your statements will be declined, and you would need to rewrite them to show how you've met those objectives in your current employment, or get them signed off by the person who supervised you. So very important question.
Yep. Okay, I previously worked for an approved employer when I began ACCA, but I changed role to a different employer who's not approved. Can I still count my time spent with my previous employer?
Yes, you would need to send in the PER confirmation form, as we've said, for us to be able to have a look at that and to update your records accordingly.
Lovely. Okay. Is freelance work acceptable for PER, and how do I record it?
Okay, what's important to remember for freelance work is, or any sort of work such as being self-employed as well, if your work isn't supervised, then unfortunately it won't count. But sometimes we know that there are questions when you say, well, they might not be my direct line manager, because I don't have a direct line manager for some reason. In those, if you have a question about that, please contact us, because we appreciate that everybody's in different situations. Your circumstances might be different. So please just contact us, and we'll talk about where you are and work out whether your current role would count towards PER. But usually it does need to be supervised. But yeah, sometimes you just need to check exactly whether you're supervised or not.
Perfect. Question here, how many hours should we work every day while we're recording our PER?
Okay, so we base a full-time week as 35 hours. Unfortunately, if you do more hours than that, so for example, if you do work long hours, or if you're doing 2 jobs, it won't speed up getting your PER. It will still have to be 36 months as a minimum. So, and obviously if you're doing less than 35 hours a week, then you would need to make sure that you indicate that your role is part-time as well. So I hope that's helpful.
It is. Unfortunately, I think we have come to the end of our time. So thank you so much to everybody for attending. I really hope it's been useful to you. I hope we've answered some of the questions that you've got about PER. And if not, we've got all of the resources that were available there that you can access. You'll still be able to access them if you come back to the on-demand version of the webinar. So do please take a look through all of those. Thank you again to the team behind the scenes who have been answering all of your questions. They've done a great job today, I'm sure you'll agree. Before you leave, please do take a moment to complete our attendee survey. It really does help us to shape future support. And do look out for more webinars in our Destination ACCA series in the future. Our next one will be coming at the beginning of September, so keep an eye out for that. But for now, thanks again for coming and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.